people freak out about the LDL cholesterol. And I know you see it in your clients all the time. And after I wrote that book in 2012, came out in 2013. It's almost 10 years old now. And people still freak out. I'm like, did I not like explain it clearly enough? Let me say it in even dumber language, because it was so simplified, trying to make it easy to understand. But it's going to be one of those things that, again, doctors put a lot of emphasis on LDL and total cholesterol. So therefore, patients think it's important. It's only important because they talk about it, not because it's important.
And you know, some of the most recent studies, and you probably know the study better than me, the higher the LDL, is a big women's study that came out. If you're like, especially post 61, they saw that the higher the LDL, the longer all-cause mortality lifespan was.
Well, look, in traditional cultures, and this is one of the things I put in my book, but in traditional cultures, free from heart disease, this is back in the Weston A. Price kind of looking at traditional cultures and how they did things before westernized food came into their culture. In those traditional cultures, no heart disease whatsoever. The average blood cholesterol levels, total cholesterol in women over the age of 60. Want to take a guess, Marty?
No.
300.
What?
300 average, meaning some probably had 250, others had 350, but it was the average of 300. And it goes to that hormonal connection to the cholesterol. Like people hear cholesterol, oh, we got to flush that out of the body because it's harmful. Your hormones under control. You're able to have a lot of great things. That vitamin D we talked about earlier, me standing naked in my backyard, you on the boat and doing all the work with no on. It doesn't happen without cholesterol in your body. That synthesis of that skin getting exposure to the sun, it can't happen unless you have cholesterol.
Right. I mean, you got to have it for every cell. And that makes me wonder why we would want to reduce it just because in the first place. You know, I mean, we need it for so much and so many functions. And I don't understand I do understand. You and I both know it's a very profitable game, this statin game. And there's a lot of people that have a lot at stake there. But even still, the word's getting out. There's some guys coming around, lots of them. And it's getting out to where people are learning. You know, they're learning that I'm not chasing this LDL coming down anymore. That's not the point. It's the triglycerides and HDL. Then the context changes.
Yes, once you kind of see triglycerides are the real bad fat. Everybody talks about LDL being the kind of the bad fat in the blood. No, it's triglycerides. And what drives triglycerides? Primarily carbohydrate.
Exactly. That's like my granddaughter that I sent you her numbers on originally. 11-year-old little girl. She's been around the table, you know, and around the family while we're all talking keto and stuff. And she goes to the doctor and she finds out her mom's getting all the information. The doctor tells her, you know, her triglycerides are 276, which should cause a heart attack in the doctor. You know, her HDL was 30, which is way too low. 11-year-old little girl. He mentions fatty liver, pre-diabetic, all this stuff. So they get in the car. My granddaughter says, what does all that mean? Well, baby, you're getting overweight, you know, basically. She says, well, then I'm going on keto. Just like that. We didn't do anything. She's the only one in the house for the longest time that was keto, 11-year-old little girl. And 8 weeks later, after she went keto, she went back for her next annual blood work. So this one was early 11. The new one was early 12. The diet started 8 weeks earlier. In 8 weeks, her triglycerides went from 276 to 55.
Yep.
And HDL went from 30 to 44. So you got to imagine, and she's doing great. I just saw her 2 weeks ago at the lake on the last trip. And it's just amazing, you know, her confidence, though, and the way she carries herself. It's changed her whole life, man. But triglycerides and HDL, 180 in 8 weeks. We
Real
don't.
Good Foods is one of the fastest growing frozen food companies in the U.S. Everything they make is nutrient dense, high in protein, low in carbs, and made from real food ingredients. They make food for every occasion: breakfast sandwiches, poppers, enchiladas, entrees, and pizza. So whether you're on a keto diet, trying to cut back on your carbs, or just trying to eat healthier, they make super convenient and tasty options. RealGoodFoods.com and at Real Good Foods on social media.
It's powerful. Like when people tell me they're doing keto or carnivore, and I'm like, so I'll just do this on a whim. Send me your lipid panel if you've got it, if you've run your cholesterol. And I'll look at it, and if it's like 170 something in the triglycerides, I go, so are you being truthful when you say you're eating keto and carnivore, you're not allowing anything in? Well, I still put the sugar in my coffee, and I still have this ice cream after dinner, and da-da-da. I know, because your triglycerides will find you out. If they're under 100, I'm like, rock on. Whatever you're doing,
Right.
rock on. And if it's 50, like your 11-year-old, is that a granddaughter you said?
Granddaughter.
Yeah, his 11-year-old granddaughter got it down to 50 something. Like, that's brilliant. Like, I remember after I lost my initial weight on the Atkins diet, I had never run triglycerides that I would even know what the numbers were. But right after that 1 year, after I lost 180 pounds, I went to see the doctor, and he ran it, and it came back 43. And I knew even then, because I started doing some homework on some of this stuff, I knew then that was really good. And like 72 was the HDL. I had radically changed all. And it
I
happened.
mean, that's perfect.
I loved your story that it happened in like very quick order.
And you know, I want to get mine done. I did get a DEXA scan done, which was really exciting. That was cool. But I want to get mine done, but I've always kind of just put it off because I don't go to the doctor. I haven't had any reason to go to the doctor. I'm not anti-doctor. I'm like you. I'm very pro-doctor, but I just haven't been. I don't do just boring checkups.
Right.
And really, I want to see them, but I kind of figure I know what they are. I figure it's probably 2 to 1 HDL to triglycerides, and it's not going to be that exciting.
Right. Well, I mean, it's good to know, good to keep an eye on, especially
Sure.
our age. We should do that. But I run all my own numbers. There's lots of online places where you can get direct access to LabCorp and Quest. You can do pretty much any test you want. So I'll sometimes run a CBC and all the things, just kind of keep an eye on things. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I haven't been to see a formal doctor. I haven't had a doctor since I fired mine. He's right over there, about a mile from my house. I had to fire him, Marty, because he refused. This was like 6 years ago. Refused to run fasting insulin. He's like, "You're not diabetic." I'm like, I'm trying to prevent that. I'm trying to keep it that way. He's like, "Well, I can't pay for the insurance." I'm like, "I'll pay it. It's $50. It's $50 to run. I'll pay it out of pocket." He still refused. I'm like, "You're fired." Like, I can't tolerate a medical professional that won't even do what the customer wants. And I think this is part of taking back your health that we're talking about here today. Be assertive. You're the boss in that relationship with that doctor. They're not the boss. They're merely a consultant in your health, and you've got to treat them as a consultant. Okay, thank you for your advice. Appreciate all your years of wisdom and education and experience. I will take it under advisement, but I'm going to make the final decision.
Right. And yeah, I have looked and looked for a doctor here, and I'm in a big city. I mean, I'm in Dallas, basically. I can throw a rock to Dallas. I'm just east of there. And it's hard. I mean, it's just hard to find someone who's on board with this way of life, who wants to look at my panel in context of the way I eat and understand it, and has read enough or studied enough to even be prepared to understand the context.
And this is why I like a lot of the online, like functional medicine doctors, because they will work with you through Skype. I know people like Dr. Will Cole is out there. There's lots of people that will do that kind of work, but you got to kind of hunt for them. Also, I know dietdoctor.com has a nice resource of doctors near you. Have you checked their resource?
I did, and I didn't come up with much right around here. I mean, probably last year, but you know, maybe 25 to 40 miles, which isn't terrible, but you would think it would be one close. But it was way up in north of Dallas, and the closest one I found was really kind of interesting at all. But they're hard to find.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a 2.5 hour drive to Dr. Westman up in Durham, North Carolina. Um, and so yeah, you're right. It's hard to find someone who would be on board that could give you good advice.
Yeah, if I could get to Westman, I would drive the 16 hours to see him. I love him.
The problem with Westman is he's got about a 9 to 12 month waiting
Yeah.
list. So
Yeah.
yeah. If we could clone him and some of these other guys, Dr. Adam Nally out west, there's so many people
Rob Sivas.
that work. What?
Yeah, Rob Sivas is
Yes.
far behind. Gina, who you mentioned a while ago, is trying to get in with him and was like, he's months out, because they're doing it and they're getting a big bunch of people that want to visit with them.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's great. But the problem is there's not enough of them. And here's the other thing, Marty. I think a lot of doctors that are not that old guard that just dug in their heels on just take this medication and shut up. I think a lot of the doctors, especially the ones that grew up in the internet age over the past couple of decades, I think they do know about all these things that I talk about on my show and other people talk about, and they are educated. They're just afraid of the system to speak out against it. But like secretly with their patients, they're like, yeah, cut your carbs. Yeah, just eat meat. They can't say that out loud because they would get in trouble with their board, because they get kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies to prescribe specific drugs for specific ICD codes for specific diseases. And it's such a shame, the game of it all. And the patient's the one that's the pawn in that game.
That's right. And I mean, really, they're kind of handcuffed too. I mean, like you said, I'm pro doctor, but they have a very limited amount of time they can spend with their patients because of insurance, who's going to pay the bill. They have a standard of care that they have to follow.
Yes.
Because insurance is going to pay the bill. And, they've got 7-8 minutes to get in there, say hi, figure out what's going on, try to make a diagnosis. They look in the computer for which drug you treat for this symptom and standard of care, and bam, you're out of there and he's in the next room. And I get it. That's the thing. But it's like anything else. There's a need, and there's going to get a fulfillment center for that need, just like Amazon fulfilled the need for people to be just able to sit at home and their stuff show up.
Yes.
And, Home Depot brought us much cheaper goods than the old hardware store. But, the old hardware stores and places are starting to make a comeback because people said, I'll pay a little more for some service.
Yes.
I don't like loading my own lumber twice, once in the cart, once in the truck. And as this need comes along, guys like me and you keep promoting this lifestyle, there's going to be more and more need for people to find someone who understands their life context.
Yes, yes. I was recently rewatching Idiocracy, the funny movie about the future kind of got stupid, and we're kind of living in it these days. But like, it was so funny because there was one scene in the movie where he had to go to the hospital for something. And, yeah, what's your symptoms? That, okay, there, okay. What else? There. And they would hit all these buttons, and then out would come this pill that would help with all those symptoms, and not actually getting to the root cause of why those symptoms are happening. It was just symptom care. And I think this taking back control of your health is stop paying attention to symptoms. And another thing, speaking of the high cholesterol, stop paying attention to made up problems. High cholesterol is not a problem. High cholesterol has only been made to be a problem because we got a drug that will lower it. But high cholesterol has never been a disease. There's no ICD code that says you have the disease of high cholesterol. No. You have the manifestations that they'll assume, the heart disease, the angina, and all these other things. But high cholesterol in and of itself, not a disease, and yet they treat it as if it is.
And you know how we got here. I mean, it looks like it at first blush when you look at what happens in a heart attack and what the LDL does to cause the problem. But that was bad science since the 50s, and we know that. And like Dr. Berry said, he goes, if you got a guy trying to lower your LDL, he hasn't read anything in 20 years.
At least
like
20.
He has not cracked a book in 20 years if he's trying to treat your cholesterol that way.
At least 20, because the LDL hypothesis was already on the outskirts circa mid-90s. And about that time was when triglycerides were first starting to be paid attention to, and the whole triglyceride to HDL ratio came in the early 2000s. A lot of the research, and I was around 2004 was when I started the Atkins diet. So I was around as that research was developing. We've known about triglyceride to HDL ratio for a decade and a half, and then how that relates to your particle size.